No, I think we're good to go. Let's dive right into the content. Thanks, Darren.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, why like I think a lot of our organizations are absolutely powered by volunteers, but why do we want to create a more structured environment for volunteers, for interns that can plug into your organization? So the Tool Library here in Buffalo, we are about 14 years old, and we were really built by volunteers and by interns. I started the Tool Library while I was a grad student at the University of Buffalo, so I really understand the power that students can have to shape and help grow organizations. So again, volunteers and interns can really help you grow from a point of being an all volunteer organization to today. Our organization has two full-time staff members and two part-time staff members. And with structured roles, obviously, there will ideally be greater impacts, better retention of your volunteers, and a clearer pathway for development for volunteers. So, potentially, someone who just started volunteering in your shop front might go on to be, a lead programmatic volunteer or someone that you can trust with community engagement events. It also helps align volunteer and intern work with your needs, as well as with the individual's professional and personal growth. And then it also is a great way to build capacity. Again, we operated for about a decade as an all volunteer organization. We really relied on structured volunteers and interns to help really develop some of the programs that are super successful today that we do have part-time staff to run. It's created a pipeline for future committee and board members. So there are volunteers that I've known for over 10 years who have gone on to join our board or become super active committee members. And it also helps you understand, as you might be thinking about adding staff, where it makes the most sense to start. And again, we have tons of different volunteers that are engaging and interacting with our organization. So obviously, one size does not fit all. Just a quick breakdown of what some of our volunteers look like. So more on the operational ends. So borrowing and member management, inventory, and general administration, kind of back end things. Programmatic volunteers, so supporting our programs out in the community, like our repair cafes and community service days, and then more specialized in kind service volunteers, so people that might be really talented at marketing and communications, photo and support, or also things just like accounting, more clerical work. So really understanding the difference between all of these types of volunteer roles, and really making sure that the expectations for each are clear to those individuals. So we kind of have three main programs at the tool library. So obviously our tool borrowing program proper. So these are just a handful of some of our volunteers that are staffing weekly shifts at the shop. We have our repair cafes. So these are free community fix-it events. And then we have our community service days. So these are opportunities for us to bring our tools out into the community, working on community gardens, public art projects. And so, there might be some overlap with these groups, but we essentially have three different cohorts of volunteers that are helping to make each one of those programs possible. So sourcing volunteers. So where do these volunteers come from? This is not an end all be all, but this is kind of where we have had a lot of luck for sourcing our volunteers. So the two main places that we get a lot of our volunteers from are going to be higher ed institutions, so colleges and universities, corporate partners, and then obviously just kind of turning to your own internal tool library community. So that could be members, or your broader community, whether it is, a city, a county, or an entire region, tapping into those communities. So for higher ed institutions, again, I started the tool library while I was going to school. So this was kind of an easier sell for me. I was already plugged into that community, and thinking about where the overlap was between potential curriculum as well as the work that the tool library was doing. But just looking at some of your local colleges and universities, and thinking about where there might be alignment with different departments and different programs. So for us, we tend to see see kind of these five majors slash departments represented the most within our volunteers. So environmental studies, architecture and urban planning, human-centered design. So this tends to be kind of like a interdisciplinary major, public health and communications, media studies. So you might have a good idea of, okay, these are the three departments that we really want to go after. This is where we want to start building relationships. So what does that look like? Again, for me, I was on campus, so I was able to kind of get audiences with these folks. I knew who to reach out to. If you're just kind of making cold calls, some good places to start really are going to be career services, internship coordinators, or service learning offices. At the University of Buffalo, there is a career design center specifically tasked with helping students find internships and externships. So they've been a really great resource. And then the UB Office of Student Engagement has also been super supportive to our organization and our initiatives. Another place, again, if you happen to know faculty, or maybe there's someone doing super cool research on, sharing economy or circularity or something that is adjacent to the work that your organization is doing. We've had a lot of luck just kind of reaching out to faculty and seeing if they do have capstone, independent studies, or community-based learning courses where, again, you might be able to get one or two interns or a student engaged in an independent study. We also tend to do a lot of tabling. So most universities are going to have, usually on a pretty regular basis, career fairs or like student engagement events where different organizations are able to set up tables. You're able to meet students kind of on the spot, let them know a little bit more about your organization, and what some of the different opportunities are. And then again, like as someone who was a student at the time, but also thinking about, do you have any alums on your board or maybe in your existing networks of volunteers? Always an easier place to start with someone who already has a connection to that college or university. So just to give you a sense of kind of what those relationships have looked like for us, one of our first relationships was built with UB's Honors College. Again, I was an alum of the Honors College, so I knew that every freshman had to go through what they call Honors Colloquium. This was a semester-long course, essentially connecting students to local organizations to get them more engaged in the Buffalo and Western New York community. So this was essentially 10 students. It was a 3 credit class, so it was 3 hours a week. So it was a bit of a commitment, and we could essentially plug them into anything that our organization needed help with. We decided to take kind of a project-based approach to that. So one of the first projects we had them work on was something we called Retreat the District, so a large-scale reforestation initiative for our community, something that by ourselves we wouldn't have been able to tackle, but with 10 sort of extra set of hands, it was something that we were able to do door knocking. We were able to do, sponsorship requests, grant writing. So these were all tangible skills that we were able to share with students, but that we were able to get back in the form of, having essentially 10 extra set of hands to help us organize that event. So we've done things like tree plantings, but we've also done anti-graffiti campaigns. We've done essentially setting up like a game lab in one of our spaces where people could come and borrow board games. So it was really a good opportunity to sort of test out a lot of projects that we were thinking about, but again, that we didn't want to necessarily make the commitment to finding a grant or thinking about part-time staff. So this relationship really ended up developing into what we now call our spring and fall service days, where it is just a collection of kind of these large scale hands on volunteer opportunities. Community Scholars Work Study Program is another partnership with the University at Buffalo that we have. I'm sure lots of people are familiar with work study, whether or not you participated on it on your campus. It tended to be, I don't know if it still holds true, but kind of just like students sitting in a library, doing their work and getting paid to be there. Which is cool. I don't want to complain about that. But the UB Office of Student Engagement really wanted to get students off campus and into more community-based opportunities. So we were one of two pilot sites that they selected in Buffalo to actually put students with us for an entire academic year, and they were paid through the federal work study program. But we essentially had students working with us from 5 to 10 hours a week. So again, we weren't paying them any money, but they were being paid through the federal work study program. This was great for, again, really focused on project-based learning, project-based outcomes, while we were able to plug the students into just, staffing the storefront. We wanted them to get more out of the experience than that. So, working with each individual, we did try to build sort of different learning plans for them. So a couple projects that we engaged them in over the past 2 years. One was a carbon calculation project. So if anyone uses My Turn as their lending platform, you know that there's an opportunity to include emission factor as well as weight for every tool in your inventory. And using those two pieces of data, you can actually calculate how much your members are saving in carbon emissions by borrowing rather than buying. For us, 12 years into the process, we had about 4,500 tools that we needed to enter an emission factor and a weight on. So, like, super data heavy, super time consuming, but a perfect project to plug students into. So over the course of the summer, we were able to plug two students into that. And now every tool in our inventory has an emission factor, has a weight. And so on an annual basis, we can go through and really be able to calculate one of those metrics, and that is great for grant applications. But again, just kind of reinforcing the impact that sharing economy initiatives like tool libraries can have on our environment. Another project that we had them plug into and that you can see demonstrated here was our Lead Safe tool borrowing program. So this is something that we had been trying to get off the ground since 2020, and essentially this is a partnership between Erie County Department of Health and the tool library, where anyone taking Lead Safe work practice training gets a tool library membership and access to tools like HEPAVAX. We did not have any funding for staff, so the community work study program was really a good sort of stopgap between developing this program kind of as an idea and getting to the point where we would be able to apply for funding to get a paid staff person. So they were able to help a lot on kind of the admin side of things of developing applications for program participants, thinking about marketing, thinking about what sort of consumables we might need for lead safe projects. And so over the course of the year, we kind of developed a lot of that information, a lot of those resources. We were able to take that then to a funder, get some funding for a part-time program coordinator. And Marty, who is pictured on the left, who was one of our work study students, actually interviewed for that part-time position and ended up getting that part-time position. So again, thinking about how more structured volunteer opportunities can be a pipeline as you begin to think about hiring staff. It's been super helpful. Obviously, Marty was already super familiar with the organization, had already been in the shop front. So it was much easier to plug them into that program and into the overall organization. Another program offered through UB is the Empire State Service Corps. So if you're familiar with AmeriCorps, very much modeled on that. And their goal, similar to the community work study, is to get more students engaged with local nonprofits doing work across Western New York. So the way this works is students are given an allotted number of hours over the academic year. In this case, it's 300 hours, so that works out to roughly 5 to 10 hours a week that students are able to work on site at the tool library. Again, this is something that we try to focus kind of project learning on so that the students, again, they're plugging into the shop, but they also have a specific project that has a start date and an end date and outcomes and deliverables attached to them. So they feel like they are bringing value to the organization and they're not just kind of another volunteer being plugged in. This is a newer program, so we've only been doing this for about a year. It's been going really well. To give you an idea of some of the projects that we've had students plug into, one of them that we started last year was essentially a comprehensive audit of our entire inventory. So we've got about 4,500 items in the inventory. 10 years, all volunteer. A lot of things obviously have changed over those years. So actually figuring out like what physically exists in the shop, what may have been lost. We have a status in my turn called Lost to the Abyss because we've all been there and done that and have been like, I saw this thing like 2 months ago, but for the life of me, I have no idea where it has vanished to. So again, like a super time intensive, a very tedious task, but something that has ideally a start date and an end date and outcomes attached to it. We were able to task three of our ESSC students with that, essentially an entire export of all of our inventory, looking at loan dates of when the last time something was borrowed, using that kind of as a proxy for what may or may not still be in the shop, and also an idea of, okay, what do we want to potentially sell at our next tool sale, really focusing on things that are popular and maybe phasing things that have never been borrowed out of the inventory. And last but not least, aside from kind of these more structured programs, there are also a lot of scholarships and fellowships that may have internship components available at colleges and universities. One such example at UB is the Western New York Prosperity Fellowship. So this offers a paid internship opportunity to any student that gets the fellowship. So it's an opportunity for them to do internships with organizations or businesses that may not have the funding to offer paid opportunities. For us, we had a student with us over last summer, and Jason, he's pictured on the right, kind of walked us through. We had gotten some funding from the county, and they were like, "You guys should buy a 3D printer." And we were like, "Okay, that sounds like a great idea, but none of us have any experience with 3D printing." So Jason actually, his background is computer science and engineering, and so he had been 3D printing for many, many years. And so he chose the tool library as his internship placement and was essentially able to help us create a budget around, what it would mean to incorporate 3D printing into the tool library's workflow. This picture here was from kind of an initial workshop that he ran with some of our other volunteers, introducing them to 3D printing, how the tool library can potentially use it to improve operations. And he has since set us up with a handful of designs and prints that we can use for replacement parts on a lot of our tools that we just couldn't find online. And Jason has been working with Jason at Rockwood Commons to sort of set up a database of, what are parts that tool libraries might potentially use or need. Can we create sort of a national library of those parts so that anyone who has a 3D printer and has that item in their inventory can print replacement parts on demand, which is pretty cool. And I feel like, again, for a university student, super rewarding experience. And ideally, we obviously got a ton of value out of Jason's work with us, but ideally, that was also a really wonderful learning opportunity for him. And he is now moving back to New York City to hopefully do kind of like some entrepreneurship around like micro manufacturing. So good stuff there. So that is kind of um, what our relationships with higher ed institutes have looked like to date. Another big place that we get some of our longer standing volunteers from are with corporate partners. So again, if you're just sort of starting from square one, where do you start? Look for alignment with, your programs and your values. If you're super big into 3D printing or youth education, looking for corporate partners that might already have programs aimed at those sorts of things. Also, a great opportunity to deepen relationships with existing funders and sponsors. So if you have someone that sponsors your tool sale or one of your programs, I feel like they are always looking for ways to not just say like, "Oh, we've got our logo on this flyer," but like, here are actual staff members engaging with this organization, doing this meaningful work. And then thinking about leveraging big community service days, and also VTO or volunteer time off. A lot of businesses will give their employees paid opportunities to engage with local organizations. And that has been super successful for us, where again, it's like, yes, ideally you're not being paid to volunteer, but sometimes it is nice to be paid to do something. So, um, we've found that kind of those one-off service days have been a great on-ramp for finding corporate volunteers. So these are, typically larger corporations will have like a week or a day every year where it's like their big give back opportunity. For a long time, I was sort of like, these aren't worth organizing. They take more energy than they're kind of worth to set up. And sometimes you feel like you're just kind of like putting busy work together to engage these people. Um, I mean, I still kind of sometimes feel like that, especially when you get bombarded with multiple requests and you're a super small organization and or you have no staff. But we've also found them as a great way to introduce employees to your organization, to your mission, introduce them to what you're doing. We've honestly gotten a lot of new members out of just having people in the shop, them seeing the inventory, like what we're actually doing, how the tool library functions. I feel like tool library is a very self-explanatory name, but I think until people are actually in the physical space, they never really understand exactly what we do. So again, just having them volunteer in the shop, we found has been a huge driver to both new volunteers and new members. And then it can also be an opportunity to engage people in other opportunities with your organization. So instead of doing kind of cold calls for committee and board members, getting people to volunteer as a starting point, again, seeing if it's a good fit for them to engage with your organization, and then for you to share, what some of your needs at that point in time are. So whether that might be a graphic designer, a a photographer, accounting support. Again, just kind of using those events as an opportunity to share what you are looking for as an organization. So what does it look like to transition from kind of that one-off service day to sustained support? Follow-up is super key. So we always have all volunteers sign off on a digital waiver when they're volunteering with us. So that's collecting their name, their contact information, specifically email. So after every event, sending a follow-up thank you message, photos from the event, tagging them on social media, and then using that as an opportunity to invite them to other upcoming opportunities. Adding them to your mailing list. Again, if you're doing programs out in the community, if you have a fundraiser, these are all going to be really great ways to kind of keep those folks engaged with your organization. And then just identifying individuals who you think might be good conduits to continue to build that relationship with that specific partner. So maybe it's someone that lives nearby. Maybe it is someone who is already a tool library member and they're super gung ho about your mission. It's an opportunity to kind of continue to build that relationship and to invite them back for the next event. So how do you get started with corporate partners and corporate volunteers? For us, sometimes it has just been like a cold call to HR or corporate social responsibility reps, CSR. to understand kind of what that looks like on their end. Like, do they do one-off events, or do they give their students or their employees monthly opportunities to volunteer? We've also found just kind of getting a sense of where your existing volunteers and board members are already coming from, and then again, just thinking about, do you have recurring tasks or like big one-off things that you need help with on an annual basis? For us, we always rotate spring and winter tools down to the basement, and that is a huge task for us. So we try to align that with, we know this bank has a big service day in November and in April, so we're able to plug them into that sort of event organizing. And what does that look like again for us individually as an organization? So M&T Bank is one of the big corporate partners in Western New York. So every 6 months they have a big community impact week. So they reached out to us and they were like, "Hey, do you want to host a group?" And again, we had to kind of scramble to come up with projects, but we knew that this might be an opportunity to continue to build sort of those relationships and those networks. So we put just a work day at the shop together for folks. They were able to help us build some storage, do some kind of innovative racking, do some signage, and we ended up getting Jay, so our volunteer on the left here. This was his introduction to the tool library. He literally lives right down the street from our new shop, so he ended up coming back to next month's volunteer training with us, and is now one of our most consistent volunteers. Is in the shop pretty much every Saturday, and continues to help us build their relationship with M&T. So him as an employee can then go into like M&T's employee kind of teams platform to say like, hey, the tool library really has this need on this date. So we literally were just out last week with 4 M&T volunteers planting in the pocket park in front of the tool library. So it is very much a reciprocal relationship that really just started with that one big off service day. And now Jay is one of our most longstanding volunteers, and he continues to help us bring more M&T volunteers into the fold. And please feel free to drop questions into the chat that we can jump into at the end of the presentation. Another organization locally, Canon Design, is an architecture and design firm based, I think, in Boston, but with a location in Buffalo. So we were able to work with them on their community impact day, and that ended up turning into a donation to our capital campaign to buy our building. So, beyond just volunteer opportunities, building these connections with potential sponsors and supporters, a really great way for you to build funding capacity around kind of those larger capital asks or around programmatic support. So, M&T now is one of our ongoing service day supporters. Canon Design, we're hoping is going to become just an ongoing sort of tool borrowing supporter. And from this community impact day, 2 of these folks who are pictured here are now board members with the tool library. Again, they just kind of love the organization, they love the mission, they love their experience with the organization, and they are now fully fledged board members. And sometimes it kind of works in reverse. So Joe was one of our in-shop volunteers that we learned worked with Moog, which is a pretty large organization, business based here in Western New York. He was able to get us an audience with their corporate giving partners at the company. We put in an ask for support of our capital campaign, and we're able to secure $15,000 for the building renovation. And again, Joe was just an in-shop volunteer. He had been with us for about 2 years, and then we just kind of found out by happenstance that he was a Moog employee. And so it's much easier to get your foot in the door when you have volunteers who are already engaged with your organization. So we've got higher ed, we've got corporate, and then obviously recruiting from within. So tapping your members as well as your broader community. We've had a lot of luck with members actually becoming volunteers, and it's been pretty interesting to see sort of what that relationship looks like. I can think of one in particular. Shoshana was a tool library member, and she was like, "Yeah, I kept renting chainsaws from the tool library and they would always be super dull and I never understood why. And then I realized all the chains were being put on backwards. So she ended up joining us as a volunteer and helped us organize one of our first volunteer skill shares. So these are quarterly events that we put together that are open to all volunteers. And she essentially walked people through like, how do you actually take a chainsaw apart? How do you swap the chain? How do you know if it's on the right way? So it's interesting to kind of see use those pain points and those frustrations that members might be experiencing as learning opportunities for your volunteer cohorts. And we were able to recruit Shoshana just through, we put something out on social media. We'll do things via our newsletter. And then also, obviously, just in shop signage has been a great way for us to attract volunteers to the organization. Um, and some of the perks to potentially offer, again, there is a whole collab kind of on just volunteer retention and engagement in general, but just some of the things that we do for our volunteers: free membership, swag, social outings, skill building, as I mentioned, and off hours shop access. All right. So you kind of have an idea of where you might want to recruit your volunteers from. So what comes next? And that really is creating the case for why people should volunteer with your organization. Buffalo, I think, has the largest number of nonprofits per capita. So competition is fierce. You've got to stand out. Some helpful things with that are going to be drafting position descriptions. So essentially job descriptions, what the duties are, time commitments, intended outcomes. For interns, thinking about things like learning objectives and potential deliverables. And again, being flexible. So we have volunteers who will come in during times that the shop isn't open, but that's great for catching up on our wait list or catching up on past due tool phone calls or helping to repair tools that have come back broken. Um, so creating materials that kind of communicate that compelling case. So for us, that looks like formal job descriptions. For internships and working more with students, we tend to make those more project based. So actually having project plans that will walk them through ultimately, what are we trying to create here? What's the timeline? What are the outcomes? Flyers and handouts. So again, just sort of succinct, super shareable handouts that you can have at tabling events or in the shop that really go through like how can people engage with your organization aside from just being sort of an in-shop volunteer, which is incredibly valuable, but there's so many more ways that people can engage. And we found kind of like this little one pager that goes through some of the opportunities. Giving the time commitment is super helpful, as well as an example of some of the tasks that they're going to be working on. And then converting all of this information into easy to share, short and snappy graphics that you can share on social media. So for your volunteers and your interns, what is mentorship and what do check-ins look like? So for us, what we try to do is assign a staff member or a volunteer mentor to each of our new interns and our volunteers. So again, this typically looks like someone who has been volunteering with us for at least 2 years. For those who don't have staff, again, I think you probably know who your go-to volunteers are. And the goal really is just to make sure that people are feeling welcomed, that they're feeling prepared, that they have the skills they need. And for us, again, we've sort of started just piloting these Skillshare opportunities where there are, super simple things that I think, again, if you have a public health intern who is working on a lead reduction, hazard reduction campaign, like, they might still be interested in learning how to change the chain on a chainsaw or, something like changing the string on a string trimmer. So providing those hands-on opportunities, to any and all of your intern volunteers, we found has been super successful. It helps build kind of that cohort too. We typically try to schedule bi-monthly or monthly check-ins, with those interns and kind of with those more structured volunteers. And so again, it can be tricky, because do you have enough time to do monthly check-ins with every single volunteer? Probably not. But when you have kind of these more project-based interns and volunteers who are working towards, some sort of ending point or some sort of deliverable, you want to make sure that they are feeling supported in that, and that they might have issues or challenges that they're facing specific to that project. So leaving space for that. We meet as a staff on a weekly basis, so we'll leave space, every other week for those interns and for those volunteers to kind of plug into those meetings. And then creating opportunities for ongoing feedback, and opportunities to implement improvements and recommendations. For us, this looks like an operations committee. So that is one of 6 committees that our organization has. The operations committee is chaired by our operations manager and a board member, but we also have volunteers, and interns that will sometimes plug into those meetings. But all of that feedback will eventually make its way to the operations committee, that can then kind of use that feedback, and hopefully help us improve future opportunities for interns and volunteers. Celebrating and sharing outcomes. So we always love to highlight our interns and volunteers, through our newsletter, social media, our blog. We call it a Tooligan Spotlight. We tend to do those on a monthly basis. And again, this is an opportunity to sort of show how people are engaging with your organization outside of just kind of the day-to-day support. We always encourage our students, especially, to do presentations, final reports, or showcases. So we had one of our Empire State students present at a statewide public health conference. They were able to take some of their work on our Lead Safe Tool Borrowing program and present on it at that conference. So that was super exciting. Again, I think just getting tool libraries into those spaces where academia and professionals might not necessarily see the overlap and the opportunity to work with an organization like a tool library on, public health initiatives. But again, like, using your students' research and their work, to make those connections, and to present those findings, to a broader group of folks. And then, thinking about how you're tracking metrics to quantify the impacts of volunteers and interns. There are a lot of great third-party tracking platforms out there. We don't use any currently. We essentially use a Google spreadsheet that we have set up as a dashboard of all the tracking, all the metrics that we want to track as an organization. One of the things that we do track is number of hours and number of volunteer shifts. So for us, we're quantifying that on a monthly basis, and then at the end of the year, we can say, like, X number of dollars, generated by volunteer activities. There's a third party, I think it's like the independent sector that values volunteer hours. I want to say it's like $34.29 at this point. So we can actually quantify, okay, at the end of the year, I think in 2024, we had over $200,000 worth of volunteer hours. So that for us helps us understand what our capacity is and maybe like how many more staff members ideally we would have to actually meet the needs and demands that are currently being met, by volunteers. So that's a really great way. If you are going for capacity building funds, you're trying to get, staff, for the first time, you can quantify, okay, we have volunteers essentially creating this much value for our organization. We'd love to split that into 2 or 3 part-time positions, doing X, Y, and Z. Some of the challenges that we've run into with internships and more structured volunteer opportunities, obviously, is going to be capacity. So, even with two full time staff members, our operations manager is also essentially responsible for volunteer coordination. So, they are the go to person that is overseeing all of those volunteers and all of those interns. So, the more structured you can make the roles, the more self-directed, the easier it's going to be, and ideally, the less supervision it will take. Again, understanding that you're going to have lots of different volunteer opportunities for people to plug into. So, thinking about what those look like, what the time commitments associated with them are, and whether they might be a better fit for a student, or a corporate volunteer who maybe only has 3 or 4 hours a month. Thinking about retention and motivation, again, we found um, when there is sort of a start date and an end date, and when when our volunteers and interns feel like they've created a product, that has been super helpful. So again, with like the carbon tracking, that was something that we weren't able to do before, and moving forward, that is something that we incorporate into when we're adding a new tool into the inventory. So they see their impact, they see that we're now able to quantify that metric, and that's been super valuable for us. And then again, we always want volunteers to get as much out of their work with us as we're getting out of them. So again, thinking about where the overlap is with our public health intern, being able to volunteer on that lead safe tool borrowing program has been super valuable for us, and super valuable for them. A few notes. So we have had varying degrees of success kind of leveraging some of these programs to build capacity and to increase more structured volunteers and more structured staffing with the organization. So our county and our city offers a youth work program. Again, we found that this can take a ton of oversight, and we don't necessarily have the time and the bandwidth to do that, especially during the summer, which is our busiest time. Our first paid person ever actually came out of AmeriCorps. So right at the pandemic, when everything closed down, we had a full-time AmeriCorps member. And that person literally was responsible for getting us to where we are today. Like they did a lot of the building manuals and helping us get incorporated and all of those things that as an all volunteer organization, we just did not have the capacity to do. So I will sing the praises of the AmeriCorps program, but unfortunately, the person that came in after them was like a complete train wreck, and we had to end their service with us early. So it's kind of like one of those things where it is so dependent on the candidate as to what you will get out of that experience. But I still see AmeriCorps as a really great capacity building program. I don't know what the future holds for that program at the federal level. Work release is not a program that we have experience with, but again, this can typically tend to take more oversight and administration than you might have capacity for. So this is typically, I think, for people who were on disability and or workers' comp kind of getting back into the workspace. So just kind of going through basic workforce development things. Again, we have never really had experience with that. And then mandated community service, we've had on and off experience with this. Some of our local high schools will offer this. Again, we've had varying levels of success as far as like how self-directed the volunteers are. And again, it just always comes down to capacity and whether or not you have the oversight. I will turn it over to Josh. Thinking about different models and what those look like as far as more structured volunteer opportunities. Thinking about apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship, what that might look like, how it might feed into the professional trades. I would love to learn more. I know this is still kind of a brainstorm work in progress. So, Josh, any and all thoughts, advice, your experience working on something like this?
Thanks, Darren. That was so impressive and so cool to hear all that you're doing. That's amazing. Yeah, this is really just beginning ideations, but we are seeing as certain funding is drying up, AmeriCorps stuff or things that are for climate resilience. We're looking at other ways that we can get more formalized volunteers um, and get more funding. And one thing that we're seeing a lot of is workforce development. And so something that kind of kills two birds with one stone is apprenticeships and certifications. So that's something we're looking into of what can we do that's really a stepping stone in a pretty formal way for somebody to have a piece of paper and a certificate says that I did this, I have these skills to move forward. So we're working with our local Shoreline Community College to look at what those certificates might look like, that we can do it through this accredited college. um, a couple that we're thinking about right now is there's a lack of bike mechanics in our area, and we have the only bike shop in all of Shoreline. So we're talking about what it would look like to create a certification program for bike mechanics. They would help us fix the bikes that are donated to our space that we're either then donating or selling off. Um, and but also getting some behind the scenes administrative, skills, but that hopefully they can help us fix those things, those bikes, get a certification, and then go on to actually get a job at one of these bike shops that seems to be hurting for those kind of jobs. Another one we're looking at is if you all are familiar with deconstruction ordinances. That really briefly is just an ordinance that a city mandates that says any building that is older than a certain year needs to be deconstructed and reused to a certain extent instead of just demolished. And we're working with the city of Shoreline to potentially create a deconstruction ordinance. We would be getting some of that material. Um, but there needs to be people that are trained in how to do this. There are some businesses, but they would need help because you really need to have the infrastructure and the people to take down those buildings in a safe way and then transport them and then sell them off. So those are the two big ones we're looking at. I don't want to take too much time because I want to make sure there's time for questions, but I want to put it out there that there are these like longer term things that we're thinking about. And if folks have experience in that or questions about it, we're just at the beginning of it. So I'd be love to talk with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. And Kate just dropped a link to their pre-apprenticeship program into the chat, which I am definitely going to be checking out. And I will add just some potential discussion and brainstorm thoughts, questions, ideas. What roles do you need most help with? What skills could you help develop in interns and volunteers? And what opportunities are there for volunteers to deepen their engagement with your organization? So again, I think we've just had so much luck with students joining us literally as a freshman in college, and them going on to become staff members with the tool library, to become board members. And it's just been really great to see kind of that relationship grow and flourish, and for them to be able to take their coursework and apply it at the tool library. And Kate, not to put you on the spot, but I did hear that you were on the other side of that equation as someone working in an internship slash community engagement office for a university. So if you would love to share your experience, any helpful hints, how to get started, please feel free to jump in.
Sure, I can say in my past life, I was a community engagement coordinator at a number of campuses. It really is all dependent on the school. So whether you're going in through the career services office or connecting with an individual instructor or connecting with the student engagement, kind of your traditional like clubs and organizations part of campus, right? They're all very different. So just know that you kind of have to go in through multiple avenues. They don't always talk to each other. Campuses are notorious silos. So find one good connection, work on that, and then make another one. So if you can make one good friend, it will help you out in general. And I would really say look at long-term connections. So just like we have busy seasons, every professor known to man has busy seasons, right? And so try to kind of see where it fits their current curriculum or where it fits their current infrastructure for student engagement and like the existing clubs that are there to get your foot in the door. And just know they're all going to be short term, so you also have to be aware of like what your campus's semester setup is, what the class load is, what their specialties are in terms of what programming they have. So definitely do your research on the front end. It's all available on their websites, but get in there and do that research on the front end, definitely in terms of campus engagement.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. And there are just a handful of resources that I think were already linked in the chat in the TLA's Google Drive. So just some examples and project plans as well as marketing materials. So please feel free to check those out. But any questions, comments? Has anyone had luck engaging, either with local colleges, universities, stumbling blocks? Would love to hear from y'all. Do people have colleges and universities in close proximity?
I'll chime in. I work for an organization called Potomac Conservancy. So we do volunteer-based stewardship work in the DMV or DC metro area. We actually worked with a group of students from James Madison University for the past semester. So they had an honors project where they were basically trying to think about ways to integrate technology with community outreach. So it was a design sprint was kind of the style of the class. So they were looking at a program that we were trying to create around outreach for property owners with conservation easements to connect them with better funding streams so that they can get low or no cost conservation landscape, but we achieved the stream miles kind of benefits. So it was a fun project working with a group of students. They bring a lot of energy and curiosity. But I also agree that it does take a lot of structure and curation. Like their schedules were just kind of a little bit inflexible. So there were kind of very narrow boundaries because it was a group project. So we were working with like 5 students at one time. So there was only the class time that we could really meet with them and talk to them. So sometimes that became a bit of a challenge, and just being able to be like responsive to them kind of on their schedule versus, our kind of schedule. I would say that those things were a little challenging. The other thing I really wanted to know from students, because this was a class, it would have been helpful from the class leadership to have a copy of their syllabus so that we kind of knew what they were experiencing as they were going through the course, because that would also help us to align our timeframes and things like that. But ultimately, it was a lot of fun. They presented, as a class project, and all of the project sponsors, which were nonprofit organizations, all got to kind of see these presentations and see the fruits of that work. So that was a good experience. And we also had a core member from the state of Maryland, actually 2 core members from the state of Maryland, which is a similar program to AmeriCorps and some of these other programs. And I agree, the quality of core members can vary greatly. So we had a really difficult time with some of the folks in that program. It was the first year that they were piloting a new avenue of that program. And I don't think they had a good mechanism for pre-screening, and the timeline was too compressed for us to do as much diligence as we typically would do. So I would say that's another cautionary tale. To the best of your ability, making sure that there's enough time that you can do enough due diligence and not count on somebody else's due diligence is also helpful. But we have a great core member now from another organization, so it does vary. You just got to roll with the punches.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing, Alexis. Chiwe.
Yeah, thanks again for the presentation. And I don't know if this is the right question or the right place to ask this question, because I'm wondering for the earlier days, maybe how was because a lot of information you shared, it perhaps for tour libraries more established or kind of it's up and running but for earlier days, how was the volunteer situation like for you? When you were trying to set it up and get it going, perhaps you don't have a tool landing program going just yet. Like in those cases, were you looking for volunteers? Were they more kind of working board? Were they more, yeah. So I'm not sure if that's related to this topic today, but I'm curious, selfishly.
Yeah, for sure. We kind of did it backwards where, I mean, we had like a handful of core volunteers when we started our actual tool borrowing program. So that was already functioning up and running. So when we really tried to like recruit, more interns and more structured volunteers, it was kind of like thinking about how do we build out from that initial, like the tool borrowing to, there's so much more that we can be doing as a community-based organization around lending, around utilizing the tools. So that was really where I think that helped us broaden our scope. But also like 14 years later, I'm also realizing like, oh damn, we do a lot of things and maybe they're a little too many things that are outside the core mission of like loaning tools to people. But that was super helpful for us just to kind of like pilot different ideas, projects, things that we saw as gaps in our community. So again, like the tree planting one, there's this huge disparity of tree canopy coverage in the city of Buffalo, where the east side has literally like no trees, and it's disproportionately people of color and low income. And so being able to leverage, a class like the UB Honors Colloquium to try to begin to tackle in a very grassroots way that issue, while also tying it back to lessons on redlining, and kind of these more sort of scholastic endeavors was really helpful. I think I'm sorry, can we go back to what was your initial question?
Yeah, it's mostly on, I think you answered part of it, but like how was that initial sort of small group of volunteers slash working board slash, founders thing that,
Yeah.
yeah.
So with that, I think we kind of had a core team, I would say, of like 4 people when the tool library actually started. And it was just, these are the people who are actually physically in the shop, but also that we're meeting offline to, make decisions for the organization. For our first 6 years, we were run under the auspices of another nonprofit. So we didn't actually have our own board. So it was just kind of like, okay, well, the volunteers who are doing the most work tended to be the decision makers. When we actually incorporated in 2017, then yeah, we had to actually develop a board of directors. And so some of those initial board members came from the initial volunteers. But some of them, were partners of the organization, collaborators. So it was kind of a mix, but yeah, I think the initial volunteers were really people who were just super bought into the mission and were actually like showing up and keeping the doors open. So I do recommend having as many possible people bought into that as soon as possible. Like I wish we had done more planning and more engagement kind of ahead of time. I think a lot of newer tool libraries are doing more like surveys out to communities and getting a better sense of like what people want and then building that core team. We just kind of were like, okay, let's do it. Let's start a tool library. Anything else? And yes, lots of great resources in the chat. So please make sure to check all those links, especially Shareable's toolkit. Really great resources. Okay, well, I think if there's nothing else, we are taking July off because it is hot and we are sweaty and tired. But we will be back in August. And please, someone remind me what August's session topic is.
It's, wait lists and reservations.
That's it. Waitlist holds reservations.
Yes, I am excited for that one because our wait list is terrible.
And we'll be publishing our next 3 months of collabs very shortly. So keep an eye on the Google group and your email and all those places.
And yeah, be sure to visit the Tool Library Alliance online, monthly meetings, always great opportunities just to kind of chat informally. Chances are we're all experiencing the same frustrations and hopefully celebrating the same victories. So it's a great space to be in. But other than that, I think that will do it. Thank you, Allison and Tom and the Shareable team for making these possible and doing all the incredible work that y'all do outside of the Library of Things collab and toolkits. Lots of really great resources on their website, Mutual Aid. Go check them out. And have a great evening, everyone.